Back to the brain anatomy, I wanted to talk about the ventricles of the brain and the blood supply of the brain. So, ventricles of the brain is the place where the cerebrospinal fluid is produced. The In pictures here, the brain is illustrated in the lateral view, that means from the side, and also in the anterior view, that means from the front. In the lateral view, we're looking at the right side of the brain. Here's the front, here's the back, the brainstem, the cerebellum, the cerebrum. And in blue, these are the ventricles inside of the brain. They're projected on the surface because they're actually deep under the surface of the cerebrum. And this is kind of like their 3D view. So let's start reviewing these ventricles. There's actually 4 of them, and we begin with the lateral ventricles. Lateral ventricles are located in each side of the cerebrum. One is located in the right cerebral hemisphere. It's called the right lateral ventricle, and the other one is located in the left cerebral hemisphere. It's called the left lateral ventricle. So this is a ventricle. It almost looks like shaped kind of like a comma. So it's got a bigger portion in the front, in the anterior, and it becomes a little bit more tapered and curved towards the back with a little tail. And it's got this portion right here. So actually, I guess it looks more like a C shape in this view. This is the ventricle, this whole thing, and a tail. So it looks like a letter C with a little tail. The lateral ventricles are pretty much identical in size and shape. And in the anterior view, we have here is the cerebrum, and this is the brainstem, this is the cerebellum behind the brainstem, and here's our lateral ventricles. You can see them better in this view, how they're positioned in separate sides of the brain. So this is going to be the right lateral ventricle, and this is the left lateral ventricle. The ventricles are all interconnected by little, kind of like little connections like this, little ducts like these. So the lateral ventricle is connected to the next set of ventricles. So actually, there's 2 lateral ventricles. They're connected each to the third ventricle, because we had 1, 2, 3, third ventricle right here. And the third ventricle is located in the thalamus region. So this whole thing is the third ventricle. And right around here inside of the brain will be thalamus. How does third ventricle look in the anterior view? This is the third ventricle right here. It looks kind of flat in this view. So it's a little bit more flat and then round in shape. If you look at it from the front, this whole thing is the third ventricle, and this is a connection between the lateral ventricle and the third ventricle, right here from the right side and right here from the left side. And this connection is called interventricular foramen. Interventricular foramen, meaning between interventricles, foramen hole. So third ventricle. Then the third ventricle right here is connected to the last and fourth ventricle, and the last and fourth ventricle is located between the cerebellum and the brainstem, right around the midbrain. This is the midbrain of the brainstem. This is the pons. This is the medulla oblongata, and this is going to be the location of the fourth ventricle right here. And what does fourth ventricle look like in the anterior view? So this whole thing right here is the fourth ventricle. So this whole thing right here is the fourth ventricle. And the way third ventricle and the fourth ventricles are connected is through this long duct. It's shown here too, and it's called the Cerebral Aqueduct, also known as the aqueduct of the midbrain, because the location of it is through the midbrain into the fourth ventricle. So fourth ventricle is actually more like around the pons region. So I did say it incorrectly. This is the pons, and this is the medulla oblongata. So this is the pons, this is the medulla oblongata. So fourth ventricle is actually located right around the pons and the medulla oblongata. So this is medulla oblongata portions, they're called pyramids, and this is the pons. So this is the fourth ventricle. And finally, the fourth ventricle is connected to the spinal cord. Inside of the spinal cord, this is the spinal cord, there's going to be a central canal. It's in the center of the spinal cord, so it's projected on the surface. It's actually not visible in this view, it's just a projection. And this is called the central canal of the spinal cord. It's a small tunnel inside of the spinal cord that is going to be continuous with the fourth ventricle and carry the cerebrospinal fluid to the middle of the spinal cord. Here we have it in this view. So this is fourth ventricle, and this is the central canal of the spinal cord. And then finally, the fourth ventricle has two openings. It has this opening right here. It's called lateral aperture. It means to the side opening, so it's actually kind of like towards you, towards your view. And then median aperture is going to be towards the middle of the brain. And these two apertures openings are going to be opening up to the space around the brain and the space around the spinal cord, as seen in a previous slide. We see it here. It's going to be opening up to this space right here around the brain and around the spinal cord, so that cerebrospinal fluid is carried around these structures.